Hello everybody. This is the short video that I will do to explain the use of constructor. In the class I have gone over a program and also talked about constructors a little, but I thought I'm going to do a small video to talk a little more about the constructors, since you're going to be seeing the constructors a lot more in the coming chapters. So let's bring our JGrasp, and we will do that by writing a small program. So I'm going to bring my JGrasp editor over here and start writing a small program using showing the use of the constructor. So it's public class, and I'm going to call this class vehicle, and we're going to have a string name, and I'm going to write two constructors. One of them is going to take in an argument, so I'm going to say string input, and this one is going to store the value that I would take as an input into my string value, the data member that I defined in my class called string. Now, one thing in this particular program, I have not defined the name to be private. I just left it as string name and I left it as public. But you can always define these things as private data members, and that's really what you should be doing when you're writing an object to make sure that you are hiding some of the data members, but at the same time you're writing some public methods so that you can access those data members, which is again something that I had explained or spoken a lot about in the class. So I have one method, and this is also a constructor, and then I'm going to write another one, and this one is a default constructor, and we'll talk about constructor in just a minute. And this one I'm going to use this keyword this, and I'm going to say this is actually my car, so I'm going to say Nissan Pathfinder. Now, this is all I want to write for this particular class. So I'm going to go ahead and compile the file. It would ask me for saving. I'm going to go File, Save As. Now, I could have continued on it. I just wanted to make sure that it's going in the right place. So that's why I came out of it. And so if I compile, then I should be able to see a compiled version of this particular class. Okay. So now let's talk a little bit about this constructor that I just wrote in this particular class. A constructor is similar to a method, however, it still has some differences. The constructors really have one purpose in life, and that is to create an instance of a class. Okay. This can also be called by creating an object. Okay. And I have not created an object, but basically the way I can create an object is by saying vehicle equals, and I can say my car, and this is the name of my object, which is of the type vehicle, and say new vehicle. Okay. Now in this case, I created my object called my car, which is of the type vehicle, and I do it with using the syntax new. And in this case, since I do not have any argument, this is the value that I would have inside my car. Okay, so this is how I would create my object. So the purpose of of a constructor, as I said, is to create an instance of a class. Okay. However, the purpose of methods, by contrast, is more general. Okay. A method generally would execute the Java code, and you can write your method to do anything that you want, executed from your Java code. Before we get into the method, or before we write the use of a constructor to show you how this particular syntax is working, let's talk a little bit about the differences of a constructor and a method. Constructors and methods would differ in three aspects of the signature. Okay, number one would be the modifiers. The second thing is the return type, and the third one is a name. Okay, so like methods, constructors can have any of the access modifiers. Okay, it could be public or protected or private. Okay, however, unlike methods, constructors can only take access modifiers. So the constructors cannot be an abstract or a final or a native or a static or something like that. Okay, so constructors can be public. Otherwise, methods can also be an abstract method or a final method, and constructors cannot be one of those. The second thing is the return type. The return types are very different in constructor. Methods can have any of the valid return type or no return type. Okay, in which case it is given the term void. Okay, however, constructors cannot have any return type, not even void. As you saw over here, in this particular case, when I wrote this constructor vehicle, I did not write a void. Okay, it cannot have any return type. And the third thing is, in terms of signature, methods can have different names. However, constructors cannot have different names. As you saw, I've written two constructors. Both constructor has to be the same name as the class. Okay, so this particular one, vehicle, takes no arguments, whereas this vehicle constructor that I wrote takes an argument, but still the name has to be the same as the class. Now, if you do not write a constructor, the Java provides you with one. However, once you write your own constructor, then it overrides the one that Java has written. So once I wrote my vehicle constructor, it overrode on the automatically provided constructor. Right? Now let's see the use of these two constructors in a method. So let's write some simple methods. Okay, so what I did was I wrote a simple class which is useVehicle, and this is where I am going to use or instantiate some of these objects. So as I had mentioned before, I created two objects. One of them is your car, and I put a value in there, and then I put an argument in there, or I'm passing a string argument in there, and then I created another object which is my car, and in that object I already have some default value that I have supplied by using the syntax this. So let me go back to my vehicle. So now I can show you that this is the one constructor which is taking a string input, and the input is then stored in name, and of course in this particular one which is the one without any argument, I have provided a default value by using this syntax this, and we'll talk about this or the use of this syntax this in just a little bit. Now in this case I also had this line where I created my object within my class, but I'm going to comment this one out since I created my object in my useVehicle class program. Okay, so I'm going to compile this file and go back to my useVehicle. So this is where now I have two objects. One of them is going to bring in the information about the default, which is given by the this syntax, and then the other one would accept this argument. So now if I want to see the information that is stored in these two objects, I can simply write system.out.println, and then I can say my car values are plus, and now I need to use some kind of a way to bring the information out from this particular object. Okay, and how can I do that? I can go back to my vehicle Java and actually write a method over here. So I can say public string get info. Now remember, we were initially talking about the difference between a constructor and a method. As you saw, I can have a return type in a method. Also, I can have a method name that is different than a class name. And of course, I do have a public so that I can use, this is my access modifier that I can use from other places. So this public part is okay with the constructor, but I cannot have a return value in a constructor, and also I cannot have a different name in a constructor. And in this case, I'm going to make it very simple, and it's just going to return name. All right, so this is the data variable that I have stored within this class, and in one of them I have provided a signature which allows me to put some value in the other one I have hard-coded the value by using this operator. So now if I go back and go to my useVehicle, at this point I can just use my dot operator and connect this particular object with the method. That's where the power of object-oriented programming comes in. So I'm going to say my car dot get info, and I can do the same thing with another statement to bring in the same information from my other object that I just defined. So in this case, it's going to be your car object, and associate that method with get info. So if I now compile this file and run it, look what happens. It says my car values are Nissan Pathfinder. Remember my car, and I had put in the value Nissan Pathfinder by using this syntax this, and which I'll talk about in just a little bit. And in the other case, I actually allowed a constructor which allows input or a string, and that is why when I go to this one, I had inputted this particular string, and since I put a /n, it's going to take it to the next line. So this is my string input that I'm allowing, which is now associated with another object, your car, which is of the type vehicle. So again, a class is my bigger blueprint, an object is an instantiation of that class. Everything that I have in that class, once I create an object out of it, I should be able to access and manipulate the data members and use the methods of that particular class. Okay, now let's go back and talk about the this syntax for just a minute. The use of this, when I'm using this for a constructor, it is very differently used than the use of this with a method. So constructors and methods use the keyword this quite differently. A method uses this to refer to the instance of the class that is executing the method. Okay, static methods do not use this. They do not belong to a class instance, so this would have nothing to reference. So static methods belong to the class as a whole. Remember, we talked about that in class, rather than to an instance. Constructors use this to refer to another constructor in the same class. So the constructor used this to refer to another constructor in the same class. So this is the same class, and I have two constructors. One of them is vehicle over here with a different signature than this particular one, and when I use this over here, it is actually referencing the object that I create out of this particular signature of vehicle constructor. Okay, so that's what it is saying, that constructors use this to refer to another constructor in the same class with a different parameter list. So this one is a constructor and this is a constructor. However, by using this, I'm referring to this particular constructor, which is different than this one by the parameter list. Okay, so it's important that you understand the difference. So in this particular code, you have two constructors. The first takes the string input to name the instance, and the second, taking no parameters, calls the first constructor by the default name of Nissan Pathfinder. Okay, so if a constructor uses this, it must be the constructor's first line. Ignoring this rule will give you an error to the compiling of that particular project, which means if you're using this has to be the very first line inside the constructor. It cannot be in the second or the third line. All right, so that concludes my simple explanation of the use of a constructor in a class. The assignment that I'm going to give would ask you to create some constructor, and by combining the lecture information from this video and the video that I had done from the class discussion, you should be able to have all the skills necessary to complete the assignment. Thank you.